Welcome to Rethink Community Podcast, brought to you by Think Tank, Inc. I'm your host, John White. For the last 10 years, Think Tank has been helping people and organizations step into the stories of those who face poverty every day. We believe that stories have the power to break through our opinions and positions and bring us together. On this podcast, we bring you real stories from real people who have grappled with poverty, faced obstacles, blazed new trails, and forged unlikely relationships. She was the president of the local NAACP. He was an evangelical worship pastor who grew up on the white suburban side of town. Their worlds collided in a basement of an office building in Springfield, Ohio. On today's episode, you'll hear the story of how Denise Williams and Chad Wilson formed an unlikely relationship and how it's breaking down barriers today. I'd like to welcome Denise Williams and Chad Wilson to this podcast. It's a pleasure being with you two. And this kind of topic is about unlikely relationships. Denise, you're retired from 30-year career at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and several years later was elected president of the NAACP in Springfield, and you were also the third vice chairman for the state of Ohio NAACP, and quite a leadership position there.
Yes.
And Chad, you grew up in kind of a law enforcement, military kind of family, blue collar, and has spent the last 10 years serving as church worship pastor here in Springfield. And Denise and Chad's worlds collided when they became office neighbors.
That's right.
And in the basement of the Commerce Point building in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And so, well, first of all, tell us individually. I'll start with Denise. Tell us about your background.
Well, as you stated earlier, I retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was the director of security there for the Special Operations Forces. And I also was in charge of getting folks their security clearances to do their jobs. During my tenure there, it was not easy. As a female working at Wright-Pat, trying to move up wasn't easy at all. So I was a victim of discrimination there. My boss sued me for $5,000 for exercising my civil rights. And I have to tell you, that was an experience. And I understand now what God was preparing me for, because I didn't understand as I was going through why I was going through. But once I got at the end of it, I knew. And once I was elected president for the wonderful city of Springfield, Ohio, I knew what my purpose was. And that was to help and defend people in our city. The short of the case is I won the case. He was removed from his business. From his position. He was a director as well. He had about 30 or 40 years. So they said Wright-Pat was guilty of discrimination, and so he ultimately lost his job. Mm-hmm. So I have to tell you, I wish I could shake his hand for sending me through that, because it prepared me for what I'm doing right now.
Very nice. So everything has a purpose.
That's right. Exactly. Everything has a purpose.
Chad, what about you?
So like you said, I grew up here in Springfield. When I was 21 years old, went into law enforcement myself for the state of Ohio. I did that for about 3 years, and my wife and I decided to move to Nashville, Tennessee, just up and change careers, go back to school. Went back to school for audio production at Middle Tennessee State University and minored in video production. And then from there went on to work in the church world in music and production. So when we moved back to Springfield 10 years ago, I began working at Fellowship Christian Church in Springfield here as the worship and production pastor. And just 2 weeks ago have stepped into a new role with a new company called Ambient Productions out of Dayton. We are moving our operations here to Springfield. And we have a studio in the basement of the Commerce Point building that we share with Fellowship Christian Church. It's actually Fellowship Christian Church that has the studio, and we are actually renting from them. It's kind of a cool thing. It's a shared space. And my neighbor is Denise, Miss Denise here. So it's been really fun to get to know her, and we had a really fun 2019 we'll get into here in a minute.
And so that's how you both you've met at the basement
Yes.
of a business center, and so tell me what did you at first, did you feel that this is going to be? I mean, you both have different backgrounds, grew up different ways, probably, and such diversity, and yet did you ever think that you were going to become friends?
Yes, because I knew his brother first.
Okay.
Andy and I are very good friends. I look at these two as brothers. I really do. I know if I get into any kind of situation, I can call Andy, or if I can't get him, I will call Chad. I mean, I can tell you right now that this is like a genuine family here. And I heard all this noise, banging and drums playing, through the walls. I said, I'm going over there to see what's going on, okay? I wanted to see what was happening. Sound like church, and when it comes to that, I'm in. So I went over there, and I knocked on the door. I said, what is going on over here? I want to play. It was just like instant. For me, I don't look at color. I really don't. And that's how I'm successful at the base. That's how I was successful at the base. And that's how I'm successful, like to think I'm successful in the community. But when I met him, I didn't see color. It was instant.
What about you, Chad?
So, yeah, my brother introduced me to Denise. Andy was the Clark County prosecutor for many years. And now he works up at the governor's office for Mike DeWine. But when he was the Clark County prosecutor, he and Denise struck up an awesome relationship. Unfortunately, when a violent act would happen or something would happen in our town that could be high profile or had a lot of dynamics to it, Andy wisely brought Denise in almost right away and would bring her in so she could get the perspective, she could see the situation, she could help translate things to the Clark County prosecutor's office that maybe they didn't understand, and just information sharing. And then Denise is so fun, it's not hard to become friends with her. So they became friends, and when we became neighbors, Andy introduced me to her again, and it was just, we have a lot of fun. We did a lot of laughing. But I will tell you this, I kind of grew up playing country music in a band, and I wanted to be the next Garth Brooks, and kind of hung out in northeastern, southeastern, Kitten Ridge area. And, very homogeneous population in Northridge when I was growing up. I think we had one person of color in my high school when I was going through. Didn't know any different. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't something that we were aware of. But as I got out into the world, especially the military, becoming into an environment that was more 50-50 at times, or even where I was maybe a minority at different times in certain units, it was really eye-opening to me of like, wow, like I've only perceived the world through my lens. And so with that lens, maybe even had some preconceived notions about what the NAACP is and what they do. And when I met Denise, all of that changed. All of that changed because I saw the heart behind it, and I saw the organization from the lens of through my friend and through this extraordinary woman who is deep waters and is fun to be around and really cares about helping anybody who's been discriminated against. As she said, not always just people of color. Anybody in the city who's been discriminated against can pick up the phone and call the NAACP office. And Denise will fight for them. She'll do an investigation. She'll root out the cases that maybe the person's not telling her the truth. And she can root that out pretty quick. I've seen that happen, and which just increased my respect for you so much.
I appreciate that.
Because it wasn't just carte blanche, like everybody's wrong or, everybody's right. Here, you go in with open eyes and an open heart. And if somebody has been discriminated against, you don't want to be on the other end, because she's going to do everything within her power to make it right.
Well, I appreciate that.
So it's been fun to see that.
But if I can just add one thing.
Sure.
And having this openness the conversation, the two of us, it was not hard at all. I mean, I had told Chad, you can ask me anything, because if you don't understand, I'm the one that can explain it to you. And if I don't have the answer, I'm going to find out for you. So we had some deep and crazy conversations, okay?
So, John, can I tell a real quick story
Yes.
Okay,
about the first time we met?
Yes.
What was really cool is my other brother, Daryl, my older brother, Travis, in town here, he buys and sells property sometimes, and he bought a property that had been foreclosed on. And inside of it, the gentleman who had passed away was a well-known musician from the area. And he was a bit of a historian of the civil rights movement. So the whole house was just full of this stuff. And we gave a lot of it away. But I found an original Newsweek magazine the week that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And it was in mint condition. And I took it down to the studio. I thought it'd be a great piece to have there. We found Johnny Lytle records. We found all kinds of cool history from this area. A Hammond B3 organ that's still in the studio today. But I had this magazine there, and it was such a neat piece of history. And when I met Denise the first time, I went back to my office and I said, she has to have this. This would mean so much to her and her organization. So I was able to gift that to them. And I'm not patting myself on the back. It was just a really neat opportunity to give a real piece of history from this gentleman who valued it so much right here in our town to my new friend. And it just really opened, I felt like it opened the door between us. And
Yes.
yeah, so that was the beginning.
That's
Still
fantastic.
have it, yes.
Well, did you have, Chad, any preconceived notions as you entered into this relationship in the basement of an office park?
My first fear was that we would be too loud in the studio.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I kept going over and checking with Miss Hattie and Denise, and they said, "Oh, we love the music. We love the music." Denise used to lead the choir at her church, and Miss Hattie sings at her church and is a pastor at her church. And so once I felt comfortable there, I was like, okay, good. I just didn't want to offend anybody with loud music if it was going through the walls in the building during business hours. But again, like I said, some of the preconceived notions about the NAACP were from my very narrow viewpoint. You know, I grew up, everybody I knew was conservative. Everybody I knew was hardworking and just, blue collar and very, like I said, homogeneous. If my friends' parents didn't work at International Harvester, they were cops, they were nurses, teachers, and very isolated community, of which I've now learned, about redlining and why that happens, and how the north side of our town is really how that came to be. I took a class this summer with Rick and Conradi called Becoming Our Beloved Community.
Yes.
You spoke there, Denise.
Yes.
And it really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't even know that I was blind to.
Interesting.
Which was kind of embarrassing, actually.
And Denise, speaking of redlining, when did you know and understand about redlining in you and growing up?
Well, when my parents, because as I said, I'm from Dayton.
Okay.
And my parents, I always thought we were rich. We never suffered. I never had any electricity or anything cut off. We always had. And my dad wanted to buy this house in Dayton on Corey Drive, right off of Cornell. And that area was all white when we were trying to get a house, right? So I remember going with my parents, and they were told, we are not going to sell you this house in this neighborhood. We were the only black family. And so when they told my dad that, I remember him he didn't get irate. He was so cool and calm. He says, I don't know what you're going to do. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't know what you're going to do, but we're going to buy this house. And he did. So the neighbors started moving away. And then the first night we stayed there, they trashed our yard, with toilet paper and saying ends, go home. So we experienced that. But I must say that after that, years after that, and I moved to Springfield, I wanted to purchase a house that I'm in right now. And I have to tell you, I asked the previous owner, because it was for sale by owner. And so I called, because the first time I moved to Springfield, I told my family, this is going to be our home. And I called and said, I understand your house is for sale. How much is it? They gave me a price. I said, can I come and see it? He said, yes. Listen, when I this is so funny now, but when I knocked on the door, the owner opened it, and he kind of was, oh. So I said, can I come in? Can I see the house? He's like, yes. And I said, so how much, after I went through it, I said, how much are you asking for it? I mean, he raised the price so high. I said, no, that's not what you said over the phone. I just spoke with you. Oh, my wife was mistaken. No, she wasn't. So it took me probably close to 2 years to get this house that I'm in right now. Okay, and it took a while for the neighbors to warm up to me and talk to me and everything. And now we are like good. And I've been in the house for 9 years, almost 10.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, that would you say that child? How old were you when you experienced that trauma? That moment when they, after you got into your house, they trashed it with nasty words.
Right.
How old were you?
I probably was 13, 14.
And I'd like to. What kind of trauma did that have impact on you? And how did that mold you? Because and shape you, or how did you have to shake that off?
Well, I had very good guidance from my parents.
Yes.
So they didn't allow it to shake me. What I saw in my parents was the fight, okay, the fight to get what you want in spite of. So I learned the way I am, I learned that from my parents, especially my dad. So I wasn't really shaken until I saw the yard. Now, then I became a little fearful. But my dad was like, okay, no, let's just clean this up, and we're going to be fine. So when situations arise, I've taken that calmness from him.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
Yes. And Chad, listening to Denise, you perhaps have heard that story before. What goes through your heart and mind as someone who probably didn't have that kind of trauma in your neighborhood growing up?
It made me really sad on a lot of levels. One, I think I knew the person that she bought the house from, so that was a little eye-opening. Two, that wasn't even in my language growing up. We moved probably 4 or 5 times, and that was never an issue. That was never an issue for me because I didn't have to consider those things. And so it definitely it was part of, and I'm still in this process, probably will be the rest of my life, but waking up to things outside of my own experience and learning to appreciate them and have compassion for them. Or I don't know if you can have empathy if you haven't experienced it, but compassion for what Denise and so many others have had to go through. And then also realizing that even though there's not a direct culpability, there's still systems in place that I've been a part of that have allowed for that. And so how do I look at systems as I become an influencer into my 40s and can make a difference in our community? How can I help build systems that will change that?
And describe the systems. What kind of systems that you see in your community? A system, education system, transportation system.
Well, yeah. As I've researched, and we took this Becoming Our Beloved Community, there was so much about race relation history in our city I had no idea about. And it's a scary subject. It's scary for a white male because there's a thing called white fragility. And
I bet there was a book written about that.
Yes, there was.
Yes.
And so I grew up, saying, hey, well, I didn't do that to you. I didn't do that to your family. I didn't, I wouldn't have done those things. That was my great, if it was in my family at all, it was 5 generations ago. So, I'd say these things like the classic things of like, well, I'm not racist because I have a black friend, or, these things. And what I've come to realize is that really racism is not so much an individual, it can be, but it's not so much an individual act. Racism is more of a systematic thing that has happened over hundreds of years. I mean, if you think about how long women have had the right to vote, it's not very long. And it's really astounding. Or if you think about the civil rights movement, wasn't that long ago, and we're still in that movement. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I would approach these things with a little trepidation at first because of that. But I'm learning to not react that way and say, so almost for example, John, every system that I grew up in, from education to college to sports to the network that I had in town, whether it be my grandfather, who was a well-known car dealer in town, and family that is doctors and lawyers and nurses and law enforcement. I was playing it with a different deck of cards than somebody at my same age that maybe was from the south side of town that didn't have that network, that maybe had a single mom that was working 2 jobs and just trying to get by. And so learning that it's way bigger than, well, I didn't do that to you. It's systematic, and it's I think a lot of people are waking to it, and I'm excited about that. I want to help more people, but it's a really scary subject. I mean, I've lost friends in the last year because of my association with the NAACP. I've lost friends because of I'm not very political on Facebook, but just challenging things that I think that might be racist that have been said at a public level, and just saying, hey, like, yeah, I don't agree with that. Just not even throwing bombs out there, but literally have lost friends over it.
So there's a price to pay in standing up for injustice.
That's right.
Absolutely, because the peer pressure is way stronger than I ever knew. Everything's fine until you challenge it, and it's what some would call a wicked problem. It's very complex. A wicked problem is one that has so many complexities it's hard to unravel. And so, where do you start?
Right.
So that's why I think most of the time I would just ignore things like that until it started becoming personalized, and I started becoming friends with people that didn't look like me, or people that weren't, from my faith, or people that weren't from where I grew up. And once you start to become friends with people that are different, then you start to open your eyes of like, oh, my world experience is 100% different than theirs. And maybe mine's not 100% right. Maybe it's not 100% wrong either.
Denise, what goes through your heart and mind when you hear Chad?
Oh, Chad is just, I'm feeling sad because I didn't know that associating with NAACP is causing him any grief, but I would stand up to anybody for that. Anybody come to me and say, I don't understand this about you and Chad, then you see, I would love to talk to that person. But on the other side, folks can't believe that I'm friends with a lot of white people, and I'm up there with the leaders, the pillar of the community, and most of them are white. So I have, folks telling me, I can't believe you trust this person because they're white. I do not lump everybody in the same basket. If I didn't hate the perpetrator from Right Pat, I'm telling you, and I had every reason to, but I could not hate him. And matter of fact, I thanked him, okay? And I wanted to thank him because once he left the base, he somewhat disappeared. But I wanted to thank him for that experience. And from that is where I really got my energy to do this, right? So I don't hate him. I do not hate anybody. Now, I may not like what you do, but I could never hate anyone because they look different than me. But what I'm trying to do is make this community a one community. There are preconceptions, is that the right word?
Preconceived notions?
Yeah, preconceived notions about NAACP. And I need to set the record straight. NAACP is for everybody. I don't care where you came from. I don't care who you love. We are here to bridge the divide that we have in our city. And if you think that we don't have a divide in our city, if you think that discrimination doesn't go on, then let me tell you something. It's bigger than I thought. Because once again, when I moved here, I was still working, and then I had my children, then church. I didn't spend a lot of time in the community. But once I got in this community, I'm like, I can't believe that this stuff is still going on. Here we are in 2020, and we are as busy as ever already. Okay? So there is discrimination huge in this city. But I tell you what, there's nothing bigger than what I can't try to resolve. But I have to have more cooperation with folks that don't look like me, right? And if they don't understand what we do, what we're about, or are we fair, just ask. I will come and talk with anyone. And I love the hard questions.
You know, I think it goes both ways, too, because when my brother was the prosecutor, he would tell me that one of the biggest challenges was when, say there was a shooting or some kind of a violent act, everybody in the community knew who did it. Everybody would not talk to the police because they didn't trust the police. They didn't want to be snitches. They didn't want to get in trouble. But ultimately, they didn't trust the police to not rat them out or whatever it was. And so this idea that so to speak, where I came from, there's a preconceived notion about what the NAACP is and what people like, Denise would represent or whatever. I think it's the same way towards towards the prosecutor or towards people in power that are white or that are in our community leadership. So one of the most important things that I've learned is just talking and becoming friends just trumps so many things in that relationship. I mean, it just jumps right over so many preconceived notions. And when you break bread together, when you sit down and spend time together and, hear about losses in families and you weep together, you laugh together, and you do some projects together, everything changes.
Everything. I agree.
Everything changes.
And what I hear you saying is you have an unlikely relationship. Mm-hmm. People probably see you together, and what's that all about? And it's kind of interesting and eerie, and or it's kind of it's odd, and perhaps. But you're saying that those unlikely relationships are actually key to unlocking the doors, yes, or bridging the gaps, mm-hmm, that we put in our community, exactly, labels that we put on community, political parties that we have, all these things that kind of categorize ourselves into a box, mm-hmm, and we have preconceived notions about, yes, perceptions about what's in that box. Yes. And it's kind of, you tell the stories, the stories you tell yourself about that person or that organization, mm-hmm, or that community. And what you're saying is some of that is just our lies. Mm-hmm. And what isn't a lie is your relationship and your appreciation and love for one another that, right, bridges all those things.
Yes.
And actually crystallizes all those things out there that we hang our banner to.
That's right.
Is that where, Denise, is that?
Yes.
Did I get that right or wrong?
You got it exactly right. And I think if I appreciate you doing this, because it would also show the relationship that we have. This is how the community should look. Okay, this is exactly how the community should look. Now, what we have to do, though, we have to build that trust. Now, I got to tell you, when I first started in 2013, was it easy? No. I mean, because no one trusted me. They thought I was one of the same, right? They thought the last predecessor didn't do anything for 20 years, and now here she come trying to start it back up, okay? And I had to gain the trust of both sides of the aisle, okay? From the police department to the prosecutor's office to the sheriff department, I needed them to know, and the mayor, I needed everybody to know that I'm only in the middle. I look at both sides. You come in with your story, sounds like an issue, but I need to get the other side, and that is my practice. Folks wanted, I've sent folks back home, and they didn't like that. Someone threatened my life once before because I spoke my piece, So that when that incident happened, the entire community was like at this press conference. I was so shocked. I tried not to cry on the air because of the support, the overwhelming support that I received. Let me know that, okay, I have accomplished something. So I have to try to do things more harder. I got to keep trying at it because we still have that divide. So I tell you, when they look at us, this is how the community should look. Okay?
And it's kind of counterintuitive.
Yes.
And it's pretty radical.
Yes.
And it's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
The blast.
And it's
Yes.
a blast.
Yes.
Literally, because we discover our community deeper, and we discover and obviously we discover ourselves within
right.
ourselves too. So this is transformative, just not for each other, just not in our hearts, but also for the community.
That's right.
And you guys are together, a mighty force.
Yes.
Together.
Yes.
And bridging the divides.
Yes.
We really appreciate you being with us this
Thanks
afternoon.
for having us. Thank you so much.
John.
This was fun.
This has been the Rethink Community Podcast, brought to you by Think Tank Inc., with music by Elijah Hamilton. Don't forget to subscribe to hear upcoming episodes featuring the stories of other courageous individuals we think you should know. And if you are part of an organization that would like to be better equipped to serve people in poverty, be sure to check out the resources we offer, including the Cost of Poverty Experience, or COPE, at thinktank-inc.org/COPE. Join the hundreds of businesses, schools, colleges, churches, and healthcare providers that have used the Cost of Poverty Experience, along with our other suite of tools and coaching to find new ways of thinking and responding to poverty.